All right, it is 1981 and the slasher genre is exploding. Halloween and Friday the 13th have set the stage, and then along comes The Burning. This film, however, did not get the love that I believe that it deserves.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because it was like sandwiched in between Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But I would say I love this movie. It is definitely a hidden gem. If you are a fan of horror, 80s horror, or honestly just the 80s, and you want to see something that is set in a summer camp, definitely got to check out this movie.
So today we're going to be breaking down The Burning, and we're going to see why this cult classic holds up today and if it's better than Friday the 13th. So let's get into it. It basically starts at Camp Blackfoot, where a group of campers decide to pull a horrendous prank on Cropsy the caretaker. The prank goes horribly wrong, and this man ends up being engulfed in flames.
Yeah, it goes seriously wrong. And this is your classic, kids at camp. They're just trying to pull a prank on the groundskeeper who is probably just a goofy guy. He's probably just just an innocent enough guy. Goes wrong, and this guy has like third-degree burns kind of deal.
Right.
And I like this because, there's so many movies from, the 80s, these slasher flicks where they don't really set up the plot at all. And when you're talking about a slasher movie where we don't need much, we just need to know kind of who is going to be the slasher, who is going to be the victims, what's the scenario. Let's just get into it. I love with The Burning, it just does that. It just gets right into it.
Right. And giving this person more of a backstory, it also kind of makes you feel a little bit sorry for the guy, to be honest. So you have a little bit of emotions going on there. But yeah, I would say that I do appreciate that backstory, because in other slashers like Friday the 13th, it's just some zombie like guy going around.
Well, it's not a zombie in Friday the 13th.
Wait, okay, so he's not a zombie, but he's kind of like the supernatural.
I think a better example would be the movie Madman, which is another.
Well, I'm trying to talk about like the slashers that everybody knows. So Friday the 13th is one of those where, yeah, he's not a zombie, but he is kind of more supernatural. It's like he dies, or you think he dies, or any normal person would die in a lot of those situations.
I don't think you've seen all the Friday the 13th.
I think I've seen enough to know that he's not normal. Like, he's not just a guy who's trying to get at all of these kids. He actually has some kind of supernatural abilities to withstand blows to the head.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I don't know why there wasn't a sequel to The Burning. It seems like a movie that should have had a sequel.
Definitely.
Maybe, who knows what happened, right? But I believe that if they did have a sequel, he would have probably became supernatural, and you would have had something like
There's nothing wrong with the supernatural. I just wanted to point out that this one has a more realistic factor to it, because this guy literally got burned and is now just seeking revenge. It just makes sense for that.
Yeah, when you're coming from the world of 80s slasher movies where usually it doesn't make sense, it's nice to where it makes sense and they get right to it. It's not some right convoluted thing that makes, where they're just trying to make an excuse of a story so they can get to the murderous rampage. We all want to get to the murder rampage.
Right.
Sure.
That's the point of these movies.
But we want to at least have a little bit of understanding of like who's getting killed, the victims.
The storyline does matter, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, at least for me, it does. Otherwise, it's just
But it's not everything in a slasher.
It's not everything, but it does help with following what's going on. So that's the plot.
We obviously have a few different opinions here. I'm definitely more of a slasher guy.
He is more. I enjoy slashers for the ambiance, but I will say they're not my favorite horror genres, but they are fun.
She likes psychological thrillers, but anyways.
I do.
So getting past just this first scene of where it's setting the stage, you fast forward 5 years or whatever, and now, of course, new camp, new counselors. It's your classic kind of story where they're at camp and you got all your characters. And what I will say with this movie, what they did very well on is they had actual enjoyable in different characters.
They did, yeah.
They had a guy named Blazer, who was just your typical, you know, tough talking guy that's always talking crap to everyone. He's got the goofy New York accent and he's picking fights and picking on people, but you kind of find out through other scenes that he's actually just a big softy.
Yeah.
And also you have the one and only Jason Alexander.
Right, from Seinfeld. This is actually fun fact where he got his start into film. And to be honest, he did a great job. All of the actors really did a great job. And that's what I really appreciated in this movie too, is that they weren't just they were hot actors in there, but they weren't all just like these glamorous, hot people. Can't
Again,
counselors. They all looked very natural. Like they looked like they were going to camp.
Yeah, going back to like, the standard of an 80s horror movie, I'm usually expecting bad actors and basically they're just hot.
Just hot.
But this one, they're actually enjoyable characters.
Which is fun too. There's nothing wrong with
for
that.
sure. Yeah.
But this one I did appreciate that they did factor in a little bit of that realism because you're at camp, you've got kids of all ages, all shapes and sizes. But yeah, it's just more realistic.
Yeah,
so
and George Costanza, he's actually funny, and you can tell, like you can actually see some of his humor that he's later going to be super famous for.
Right, yeah.
And he's young, he's got hair. It's if you were just a fan of Seinfeld and you want to see a movie that has him just for fun, I would check it out just for that. All right, so we've kind of set the stage of the beginning and the setting of the movie. Now, I want to talk about the most important part, and that is, the killer and the kills. I will say, I mentioned earlier, this is one of my favorite slashers from the 80s. And, one of those reasons why is because the killer uses garden shears, which is just really big scissors. And that's kind of the classic picture is him holding, the shears like that.
Yeah.
And I will say, to me, that is a lot scarier than a machete or an axe.
Really?
Yeah, so that always stood out to me.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
The kills are great.
Oh,
I would say that, every kill is pretty unique. The practical effects are amazing.
That's really good. Yeah. Which is what's his name? Tom Savini is the guy behind all of the practical effects, very creative with it.
And just a little bit more about Tom Savini. So he actually did the effects for Friday the 13th Part 1 and Part 4. Now, he was actually supposed to do the effects for Friday the 13th Part 2, but he turned it down to do this movie. I don't know if he understood how big the franchise of Friday the 13th was going to be, and if he regrets that, but honestly, it is a good movie, and it's not like he turned it down for something that was just like a horrible movie.
Right.
And
it just didn't take off
as much.
Yeah.
And I will say, you have Friday the 13th Part 1 getting released in 1980. You have Part 2 getting released May 1st, 1981. And you have The Burning come out May 8th, 1981. And so that just shows you kind of like how fast they were starting to make these slasher camp movies after that original flick. And I do think that's why this movie got a bit shadowed. I'm also a sucker for movies that take place in camps in the 80s. I just love the way that it looks. I love the way that it feels.
It's just really homey.
Yeah, it's like, the sun's out.
Nostalgic vibe.
The green grass. It's usually filmed somewhere like in New Jersey or like in the East Coast. Yeah. And they, have short summers. So it just seems like it's a very exciting time. It's like, it's only hot for a couple of months. Let's go to camp. Let's go to the lake. Yeah. Let's go be out in nature. Get out of the city. And it really, it just sets the stage. It's a perfect thing. You're away from society.
Yeah.
It's in the 80s. Nobody has cell phones. You're at this camp, which, also
all these hopeful faces, just trying to have fun. So another thing about the atmosphere of the movie is that it almost gives off a more cleaner, polished look with Cropsy lurking in the woods, just stalking all these kids. It does make it very creepy. I mean, I guess they also do that in Friday the 13th, but for some reason in The Burning, they just make it like longer, slower shots where you're really kind of getting the anticipation of this guy's just going to pop out at any moment. So I really like that.
Yeah, they really build up, the scenes. They do the POVs. You
Mhm.
can tell that he is lurking, he's watching them. But I think what makes these scenes resonate the best is the music.
Oh,
I really like the soundtrack for this flick. It's how would you describe it? Like an 80s kind of wave
the synth
sound,
wave. I love synth.
but it's on the creepy side.
Yeah.
It's the creepy wave. That's a real
Horror
thing.
wave. Yeah.
But it's very eerie and it's very
Gruesome.
unsettling, and they play it every time that he's near, every time that he's watching or lurking, and I really enjoyed it. If you are into 80s movies, even not even horror movies, I think you would enjoy to listen to it.
So one thing that did stand out to me is usually with movies like this, there's a final girl. And there was not that in The Burning, which was interesting.
And maybe that's another reason why I didn't take off as much.
Who knows?
Yeah.
It didn't really ruin the film for me, but that was just something that I noticed. Who ended up filling that role is Todd, one of the counselors.
Yeah, so Todd is actually one of the kids from the beginning
Mm-hmm.
that did the prank on Cropsy, and so now I think now he is actually a camp leader, a counselor, or whatever.
Right.
And you can tell, and they make note of it, that he has grown as a person. He's a very responsible, respectful guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like he probably does feel sorry for what happened, and is a good guy that just made a mistake. But the end of the movie is really a showdown of him and Cropsy. Yeah, so my favorite scene of the movie, and probably anyone that has watched this movie before is going to say the same thing. So there's a very iconic scene where there's been some chaos on the camp, and essentially their kayaks get lost and they have to make this raft, and they're trying to just raft back to camp. They got lost, and long story short, they're drifting back, and it's very calming. They're on the lake, it's chill, and then just like all of a sudden, Cropsy comes out of the
Garden
water,
shears and all.
garden shears up, and they film it very well too, kind of doing the POV looking up at him.
Yeah.
And it's a short
Man, those
scene,
kill shots.
but he just gives it to everyone on the raft and just,
It was brutal.
yeah, brutally, gruesomely
That's
slices them up.
probably the scene that put it off the naughties list or got banned in some areas.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this movie, and in particular this scene, was on the video nasty list,
Right.
which is this
Okay.
whole thing in the UK where they're banning movies from the 80s.
Yeah, it was definitely a great scene, and again, with the practical effects, like just outstanding. I love practical effects personally more than CGI and all that new stuff today because it looks so real and it was so brutal. It
Yeah.
was actually pretty awesome. Just the way that they orchestrated that was really good. And we're going to talk about the things that really just didn't age well in this film or just wasn't really our favorite.
Yeah, so like I guess the main character besides the camp counselor guy is one of the kids at the camp. His name is Eddie, and he's just a weirdo, and they don't really explain why. And I guess, you're supposed to feel sorry for him, and he's kind of one of the main characters, but he's just weird. And he's like,
Like creepy
watching
weird.
girls take showers. He's watching some of the other more popular campers like hook up in the woods. I think what they were trying to do is make it believable that he is the killer, for people on the camp, not even us, because we know who the killer is.
Right, we've
But
already been introduced to him.
weird things are happening, and they're trying to basically make him look like the bad guy so that he can get blamed for it. He's, he is actually seeing things and trying to tell everyone else, and it's basically like no one believes him because he's just so weird. And like I get that, but that part was not put together very well, and he is definitely
Like
not.
his character.
His character was not very likable, which I think would have been fine if he would have been just, an off character that like died at the beginning or something. But he really was
One of the
like
main characters.
once like the
in
main character
movie.
besides the counselor.
Yeah. I would say that would be my criticism. Like I've said, or but I'm not a huge slasher person, so I like it for again the nostalgia, the ambiance. So really, from that perspective, I would say that it is a great movie. It was well filmed and directed. But yeah, I would say he was my least favorite character. Other than that, I really just don't, it's just a slasher movie to me. So after watching The Burning, does it hold up? I think we basically said yes, it holds up, at
It
least for
it
me.
definitely does, and I think that he can. I think that this movie can stand with some of the giants. I think it's just
Absolutely.
as good as
Yeah.
a Halloween.
You know what? I did not say this before. I think that Cropsy he's scary, but he's really not as scary as Jason. I don't think since it only got one movie, they didn't have time to really craft that character and make him his own villain. He was just really I think disgruntled is watering down what he really is. Obviously he's enraged because these people ruined his life. But yeah, that's pretty much what it is. He's just like this enraged man who's just trying to get revenge. So we need a little bit more to make him a real slasher villain, I think. And that's probably
Yeah.
why there's not a whole lot about the
I think if he would have gotten a few other movies,
yeah.
he could have been up there.
But with that being said, is it better than Friday the 13th? Which that's a tough one.
That's a really tough question. I would say, for me personally, if we're just talking about just Friday the 13th Part 1, I think that it's better. Now, I think that
I would agree with that.
I think that there's other movies in the franchise that are better than The Burning, for sure. But if we're just going off that the first film,
Right. So I want to say something about that too. I would agree with that. I would say the first film of Friday the 13th compared to the first and only film of the Burning, no competition. I think the Burning had a better like storyline, layout, characters, all of that. But it's a little unfair to compare it to the rest of Friday the 13th because they've obviously had more time to perfect that storyline and the characters and the villain, which is an iconic villain in horror history. Had they had more time and to do this, then I think that they could have made Cropsy more iconic, but they did not. So yeah, I would say if we're just comparing the first movies in both slashers, Burning hands
and
down.
that should be saying a lot because the Part 1 of Friday is a great movie.
So how we do like to do things is we're going to go ahead and rank this on a system, a pyramid system of uh, killed in the first act, nearly got away, twisted reality, and nightmare fuel. So Kenny, go ahead and give me your verdict on this film.
Yeah, so for me, this is definitely Nightmare Fuel. I love slasher movies. I love the fact that he has garden shears. The raft scene really does it for me. I'm a big fan of just, building the tension and then just have it just kind of pop like a balloon
Yeah.
right in your face. I love that style for any type of movie. The characters were great. The plot was good. And so yeah, for a 1980s slasher movie, especially, I cannot praise this movie enough. I think it's great. I think it's nightmare fuel. I think it's a genuinely a scary slasher movie.
Well, I can tell that you really love the movie. For me, it's actually going to go in Twisted Reality, mainly because I have a little bit of a bias there. I'm not, like I said, a huge slasher person, but I do respect what it is and what they did with the movie. So yeah, my vote would have to be Twisted Reality. Maybe if I was younger and I'm just being introduced to the horror community, that would go in Nightmare Fuel because yes, that raft scene alone is terrifying. All right, guys. So let me know in the comments below if you've seen The Burning and if you like it. Also, do you think that Cropsy is scarier than Jason? And are there any other underrated horror movies out there, slashers in particular, that you think we should cover next?
Yeah, I definitely want to hear also about your opinions on horror camp movies in general because like we were saying earlier, love the vibe of those. Sometimes they can be a bit predictable and lazy, but when it's done right, they're amazing. So
Yeah,
to me, this is one of the best camp horror movies ever.
I would agree. All right, well, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much, as usual, for being here. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content.